Have you ever tried building a new habit and thought to yourself, this is it. This is going to be great. This time I've got it, only to completely forget about that new habit a couple days later? Or maybe you've gone all in on a new routine. You've set the reminder, you created the plan, only to find yourself ignoring said reminder when it pops up, thinking, I'll just do it later. And then, of course, later never happens. First things first, as I frequently love to remind all of our brains, the reason we do this is not an indication of some willpower problem. It's not because you're lazy. It's definitely not because you, quote unquote, just need to try harder. Okay. The real challenge here is that so many of our ADHD brains not only struggle with motivation, we also struggle with the activation. Even when we want to do something, even when we know the thing is important, there is often this invisible wall between us and actually starting. So this means that if a new habit depends on both actually remembering to do the thing and needing to force ourselves to keep taking action, we are asking a lot of the brain. We are essentially working uphill, which makes sustainability extra challenging. Now, fortunately, there are supports that we can put in place so these new habits, these new routines don't seem like such a heavy lift. And in episode 297 of the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast, we are diving into two of my favorites. We're going to talk about what they are, how they work, and when to use each so you can start building habits that last. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you? Today, we are talking all about habits and more specifically, my two favorite approaches to building sustainable habits for the ADHD brain. This came up in one of my group coaching calls recently, and I realized, you know what? We need to do a podcast on these two strategies. And the two strategies that we're talking about today are habit stacking and habit pairing. These two strategies, I love them so much because they work with our ADHD brains by building habits into our existing routines. And here's why this matters. When we can build habits into our existing routines, it means that we ultimately remove the need to rely on decision-making and motivation and willpower, especially when we're trying to do these habits and routines at the end of the day when we've already used all that stuff up. So today what we're going to do is dive into both of these strategies, habit stacking and habit pairing. We're going to talk about, as I mentioned, what they are, how they work, and when to use one over the other so that you can start building those sustainable habits. Sound good? All right, let's dive in first with habit stacking. What is habit stacking? At its core, it's essentially attaching a new habit to something that you already do regularly. So it's literally like you're stacking one habit on top of another. So instead of trying to remember a new habit out of nowhere or just relying on motivation to make it happen, what you do is you link to an action that's already part of your day. That's both helping the working memory go, oh yeah, we're doing this after that, and you're already in activation energy because you're already doing something so that the next habit can follow more easily afterward. So for ADHD brains, I think this works so beautifully for a handful of reasons. As I just mentioned, number one, it removes the need to remember. Instead of constantly depending on even more alarms or sticky notes, like we talked about in last week's episode 296, about how we can make our reminders actually work for us. When creating a habit stack, the action that you already do serves as that cue. So you don't need another reminder. Number two, I love it because it helps to keep new habits small and manageable rather than trying to overhaul your entire routine, which is what our brains generally want to do. Mine certainly does. Instead of doing that, we're adding just one tiny step to something that's already familiar. which feels so much more doable for our brains. And then number 3, I think many of our brains love sequences. When one thing regularly follows another, the brain starts to see that pattern, it starts to expect it, which makes follow through feel much easier over time. Okay, so let's talk about what this looks like. How does habit stacking work in real life? Okay, so the key to habit stacking is essentially finding an anchor, something that you do regularly enough to serve as that reliable trigger. Now, this doesn't have to happen every single day without fail, okay? None of us are robots, but we do want to focus on stacking the new habit with something that's already part of your general routine. So a couple of examples. Maybe after I turn off my alarm, I drink the water that's on my nightstand. Or after I feed my pet, I take my own medication. As I microwave my lunch, I will do a 30-second hamstring stretch while I wait. So what we have here is a goal of choosing an anchor that's already fitting into your life, something that happens regularly enough to reliably trigger that new habit. And then again, we want to start small. We want to stack that super tiny habit, and then we can let it grow. And over time, that habit stacking makes the routines so much more sustainable because, again, you're slowly building upon what's already working for your brain. Okay, so that is habit stacking. Now, let's talk about habit pairing. What is it? How do they compare? So I love habit pairing for making boring things, tedious things, tasks that are just like meh, to make those a little more palatable, a little easier to stick with. So habit pairing works by linking something that you want to do with something that you already enjoy doing. So instead of forcing yourself through some task with sheer willpower alone, which, let's be honest, rarely works for the long term. I don't know that I can find an example where it's worked for me long term. Instead, what you're doing is you're turning a more dopamine-friendly experience, if you will, something you actually want to do, you are pairing that with the new habit. And that makes that new habit more bearable because you're doing it with something you want to do. And for ADHD brains, again, I think habit pairing works especially well. Firstly, because it helps to reduce that resistance. By tying a less exciting task to something you actually like, it does make it easier to get started because, again, you're removing some of that friction and the activation energy is a little bit less. You don't have to have so much energy because you actually enjoy the thing you're pairing the other task with. And it also creates a sense of reward, a sense of anticipation. You know you get to do that fun thing while you're doing that other habit as well, right? It kind of makes it more appealing. And I also find that it can help turn the shoulds, well, I should do this, into, no, I actually kind of want to do this. And this is huge because let's be real, doing things that are not what I talk about as a full body yes, when we are trying to do a whole bunch of things that are not a full body yes, this is particularly challenging for ADHD brains, okay? Which means when we are trying to do a whole bunch of shoulds, it's nearly impossible. And when we can use habit pairing to turn those shoulds into a want to, it's huge. Okay, so now let's talk about how this works. What does this actually look like? What are some examples? Some kind of traditional examples might be I only listen to my favorite podcast or my favorite audiobook or whatever while I am on a walk with my dog. Or I watch my favorite series while I'm folding laundry. Or I put on the Great British Bake Off kind of passively in the background while doing meal prep. And here's the key part, okay? We want to make sure that the fun part, that thing we're enjoying, is actually exclusive to the new habit. Okay, this is tricky. If I watch the Great British Bake Off at any time, it kind of loses that motivational pull and is less likely to be a reward for me of getting the meal prep done. So what I want to do is make sure I only pair the Great British Bake Off with meal prep. And then it maintains that allure. Okay, so the idea here is to create that little mental connection. So when you think of the habit, your brain automatically associates it with something you genuinely enjoy doing. And over time, this helps shift the task from one of drudgery and dread to something so much more enjoyable. And in turn, again, sustainable, which is what we're going for. And that makes all the difference. Okay, so we've talked about both habit stacking and habit pairing. Now, let's explore a little bit about when to use each one and how you can really make both work for you, okay? Because when I first learned about these, I was like, these are amazing. Do I use them for all of my habits? Do I use them all at the same time? How do they work? Okay, so let's clarify that. When do you use each? So they're both incredible tools, but they solve slightly different obstacles or slightly different problems. So the key is figuring out what is getting in your way. Is it that you're forgetting to do the habit? Or is it that you are resisting the habit because it's boring or unpleasant in some way? So a simple way to kind of decode which approach might be more useful for you is you use habit stacking when you already have a strong habit in place and you want to attach it to a new one that you might forget. Or you need a simple cue to trigger the new habit because remembering to actually do the thing is the main challenge. It's not that it's super unpleasant or that you hate doing it, you just forget. And so you want to reduce the forgetting by linking that new habit to something that already happens in your routine. Okay, so you're building this habit. It doesn't need extra motivation, just a little reliable reminder, right? Taking your meds, drinking water, checking your calendar in the morning, things that aren't a big lift. You know you could do it if you could just get your brain to remember. That's where the habit stack comes in. So if you regularly forget to take your meds or something, you might stack that new habit onto something you never forget. So I know for myself, when I was still going in to teach at the university and stuff, I would literally put the bottle of my meds in my coffee cup because I didn't put just the pill in, because what if I started the coffee maker or whatever. But I would just put it in the coffee mug. And then when I went to go pour, I was like, oh yeah, I got to take my meds. I saw it there. I knew I wasn't going to forget my coffee. Okay. So that's habit stacking. Habit pairing, you want to use that approach when the habit itself seems really boring or unpleasant. You have a hard time starting. That activation energy, it takes a whole lot. The resistance is strong. This might be cleaning, exercising, responding to emails, right? Whatever it is for you. You need that extra dopamine motivation to get started and stick with it, because the habit itself does not seem rewarding to your brain yet. It might eventually, okay? You might over time start realizing, ooh, this is totally worth it. That's for me with meal prep, for example. It felt like such a heavy lift for so long. And then once I started doing it and I paired it with something that I was enjoying, and then I realized the benefits at the end of a long day when I already had some protein ready for myself, I was like, yep, that's worth it, right? So things can shift as well, and your brain does start to appreciate the long-term effects, but it really helps to sustain your commitment to showing up for it until your brain starts seeing the benefit on the other side. An example I was thinking about recently, because I hate making returns so much. So if you're like me and making returns feels like a chore, I was thinking, ooh, I can maybe pair this with something. Like I usually do make my coffee from home. Maybe I pair that when I have to do returns or whatever with swinging by Caribou Coffee, which is by the return place where I live. So what can you do to maybe take what you don't love doing and pairing it with something could make it a little bit more enjoyable? So again, how do you know whether to use a habit stack or a habit pairing? If the main friction is forgetting, start with habit stacking. If the main friction is resistance or getting started because it just seems so boring or there's dread or something, start with habit pairing. And if you're not sure, try both. You might find that, again, different habits are going to work better with different strategies. So the goal here is to not force yourself into some rigid system, okay? It's to create supportive routines that feel both natural and sustainable for your ADHD brain. Okay, so now that we know when to use each one of these different habit stacking and habit pairing approaches, let's also do just a quick look at some common pitfalls that I tend to see come up pretty often for myself when I'm doing new habits, my clients, or that I've heard from people in our community. Let's talk about some of these pitfalls and a couple of strategies to work around them. But before we do, have you heard about my simple step-by-step approach for ADHD brains to lock in a routine and make it stick? If not, you're going to want to check out my free course. It's called the ADHD Routine Revamp. And you can tap through the link in the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/routine to sign up. This course is here to help you learn how to build ADHD-friendly routines in a way that works for your brain so that you can lock them in, make them stick, and use them to support you as you go throughout your day. So again, tap through the link in the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/routine to sign up and start locking in those routines today. Okay, let's talk about some of these pitfalls and a couple of strategies to work around them. Probably not surprisingly, the first pitfall that I see come up most often is that we just forget the habit exists. Okay, this is probably the most common struggle that I hear. And, we make a plan, we feel great about it, and then we just completely forget the thing. Okay, so what can we do here? This is where we would probably want to bring in some habit stacking, but also bringing in a physical or visual cue that could remind you. Your ADHD brain, it's probably not going to just remember on its own. So we want to bring in some sort of reminder that's unskippable. So if you want to journal every morning, put your notebook next to your coffee maker. If you want to remember to take those meds, put them by your toothbrush or your coffee cup or your phone or whatever. If you want to remember to take a stretch break in the middle of the day, keep your yoga mat in the middle of the floor right next to your chair where you have to step over it, right? Out of sight is out of mind for so many of us. So put that cue in sight where you know you're going to see it. The second common pitfall is that we tend to get a little bit bored of the habit, so we drop it. It's no secret that a lot of our ADHD brains crave that novelty, that new component, and what feels really exciting and fresh today, to risk sounding dramatic, might feel soul-crushingly boring in the next few weeks. And so if a habit does start to feel a bit stale, your brain might either subconsciously or consciously start avoiding it. So what can we do here? Well, we can try and keep things fresh by switching up the fun part of the habit if you're using habit pairing. So if you are habit pairing your workout with a podcast, maybe you have 2 or 3 podcasts that you really love and you rotate between those shows. Just those little changes can make a big difference. If you're using a reward system, change up that reward just slightly to keep it fresh, to keep it exciting. Those small tweaks can be all we need to help keep the brain engaged and not lose that momentum. The third most common pitfall that I do tend to see come up for us ADHD brains when we're establishing new habits is, as no surprise, going too big too fast. Many of us tend to be that all or nothing, all in, do it all or what's the point? And we go all in, just determined to change everything at once. You've heard me talk about this so many times on the podcast, I know. And I talk about it because we do it. And so we try and go all in, we try and do everything, we try and transform everything, and then we burn out and abandon it completely. So what we want to do here is scale way down. The smaller the habit, the easier it is to sustain. So instead of I'm going to stretch for 20 minutes every morning, start with that 30-second hamstring stretch while you're standing at the microwave for lunch. Instead of, I'm going to write 5 pages in my journal every day, start with writing 1 sentence. Instead of, I'm going to clean the whole kitchen every night after dinner, start with, I put the dishes that are in the sink in the dishwasher. Or the dishes that are clean in the dishwasher, I put the cups away or something. Okay? Tiny habits are way easier to stack and they feel much more automatic, and then you can build from there. And then the 4th main obstacle or stumbling block that I see for ADHDers when it comes to establishing habits is losing the motivation if that reward disappears. So a tricky component of habit pairing, like I talked about, is if you stop enjoying that fun part, the whole system kind of collapses. So what we want to do here, some solutions, is to make sure that reward is enjoyable or you're ready to swap it out. So if you always paired cleaning the basement with your favorite playlist, but now you hate all the songs because you listen to them way too many times on repeat, been there, make a new playlist. Allow yourself to do that. If you paired admin tasks while eating that snack that you're obsessed with, right? The only food you want to eat all day long, every day, and it's like the only food you care about, but then it's dead to you and you never want to eat it again, switch up the snack, okay? The goal here is to make sure that the habit still seems quote unquote worth doing if and when that fun, novel component disappears, okay? We want to switch it up so that there's something enjoyable still paired with the habit. Okay, so let's kind of wrap this up. A couple of key takeaways. If there is one thing that I have found to be true time and time again, as I have worked with hundreds of ADHD brains over the years, it's this. We thrive when we have our right level of structure. And that right level of structure without the rigidity. We need systems that support us, but they have to be natural. They can't be forced. We can't force ourselves into these boxes. And that's exactly why I think habit stacking and habit pairing work so well, because they're creating these built-in habit triggers. So you're not solely relying on motivation or sheer willpower or hoping you're going to remember. Instead, your habits become part of what you're already doing. So this week, I invite you to put this into action. Here is a challenge for you, should you choose to accept it. Number 1, pick one habit that you want to work toward, that you want to build. Okay? Keep it small. Number 2, decide if that habit might be better suited to habit stacking, where you're going to attach it to something you already do, or habit pairing, where you're adding a fun or more rewarding, enjoyable element to it. And then step 3, try it out. Try it out for the next week and see how it feels. Does it make the habit building easier? Does it remove some of the struggle? What's working? What's not? And the best part is there's no wrong way to do this. Because if something doesn't work, you can tweak it. You can adjust it. You can use that data you found over the week and shift and experiment until you find what really clicks for you. And I would love to hear what you try. Let me know on one of the posts for this episode or send me a DM. I'm over at I'm Busy Being Awesome on Instagram. What habit did you choose? Did you try stacking it? Did you try pairing it? Did it make a difference? Every ADHD brain needs something a little bit different. And when we share, when we hear what works for one another, it helps everybody in this community. So I can't wait to hear what's working for you. Let me know over on Instagram. I am at I'm Busy Being Awesome. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you are ready to take these concepts and apply them to your life, if you're ready to learn how to support your ADHD in a way that works best for you, I invite you to check out today's show notes where you can learn more about how we can work together, both in my small group coaching program called We're Busy Being Awesome and in one-on-one coaching. Also, do you know someone who would love to learn a little bit more about habit stacking and habit pairing and how they can incorporate these two strategies into their lives so that they can start building sustainable habits for themselves? If so, would you be a rock star and share this episode with them? You could send it to them in a text message or snap a screenshot and share it on your Instagram stories. Either way, please know that I so appreciate you, first and foremost, for tuning in and listening. And secondly, for helping me get these strategies to even more ADHD brains who need them. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.